Hello, this is the Cosmos Café for May 28th, 2019. It is mostly an unplanned Cosmos Café. No readings were assigned. No discussion was had beforehand. The only talk around this cafe was an email thread started by Ed. He was unable to attend the past couple cafes. And in this email, he noted that since he is in a different location, and since he was reviewing the cafe or watching it for the first time, he actually did not watch it. He listened on the MP3 available recording through the website. And he made a few observations that in our cafes, we do not necessarily cater to certain disabilities, to those who might have blindness, deafness, though he was solely referring to someone who can hear but cannot see what is going on. So in the previous call, Johnny led the group, which was Micheal and I, through some clean language exercises. And it was noted that upon listening, Ed could not see the drawings, nor were they described. Also, later on in the conversation, there were a few references to books, which maybe the author was left out, or a description about the book was not made. So, although I didn't participate directly in that conversation, I read through it and was inspired to experiment with this cafe. Currently, I am blindfolded. I cannot open my eyes. I can sense a little bit of light, but I left the light on, so those who may be watching can see who is talking. We don't want to limit their perception, but this will be an experiment, and we'll see who arrives. I don't even know if I'm recording this at this time, so I might just be talking into the camera. So I'm waiting for my partners to arrive, and they will help guide me before they participate in the experiment themselves. If they choose not to, that's okay as well. I'll report from my zone here. But I'll note a few observations from the get-go. Before getting started, I had intended on being blindfolded as I prepared for this, which is not possible. I access the Zoom line through infinite conversations through my phone. Perhaps it's possible if I use the accessibility feature, voiceover, which allows the user to hear what is on the page, to touch certain parts of the screen, and be told by mechanical voice where they are on the screen or what is on the screen. And it can also read articles on the internet, help navigate the internet. So perhaps I could have set that up, but that would have taken a long time for me to get acclimated to the system without sight. I've used it with sight, and it's already difficult enough to maneuver. So that's one factor that I factored out. So I accessed the Zoom line with sight through the Infinite Conversations website. Also, I had to set up whether or not the phone would be charging as I'm using it now. I intend for this to be a shorter cafe based on the participants stating they won't be able to be attending full time. So I hope my battery life will survive. If I had to fumble for my charger now, I would have difficulty doing that. Also, if I made a few notes beforehand, I cannot read those now. And based on my memory, since this was going to be a visual activity that I could perform while in the moment, now I cannot perform that activity. And as some of us have noted with technology like Google Maps taking over our perception of direction, if Google Maps doesn't work, some of us would get lost in our own town. So the questions I wanted to ask are missing from my memory right now, but they might appear later on. So part of the conversation will be revolved around the actual experience, the physical experience perhaps of what it's like to have this disability. But on the flip side of the conversation, and perhaps when others join in, if they do, I want us to consider, is this really a disability? We've noted in these conversations that we're limited to the visual field, the squares on the screen. We cannot touch each other's bodies. We cannot feel the same temperature in the room. We cannot sense the same senses as we do if we were to be in the same room. So we're limited to what we can, like the nonverbal cues, though they still exist. So I'm wondering not only what is lost by this type of participation, but what is gained. It has been noted in studies and seems intuitive that someone with a disability such as blindness will, though they lack that sense, they will increase their sense of hearing. Oh, I'm hearing noises.
Okay,
okay,
Doug. This is
Hello.
Mike. Did you guess it was me or what? How did because I didn't have my earphones in and I heard you talking with the blindfold. I'm going, what's going on?
So I did hear the squeak in your chair, and I knew it was you.
That is excellent, Doug. That is
your voice is very loud, so I'm hoping I'm turning the volume down now on my phone.
Yeah, I'm turning the volume. Hopefully, yeah, I'll turn my volume down in my throat.
So
it off.
I guess you've figured out the mysterious exercise experiment that we're doing.
Yeah, we're gonna do. So you want me to put on something around my eyes? Is that it?
That's correct. When you're ready, I don't want you just to do it, and then if you've got to go to the bathroom soon, or
well, I gotta find something to do it, and I think this is totally inspirational and creative. I love it. Thank you. I'll be right back.
There's that squeak again. So while Michael is settling in, I'll continue talking. But I was interested in the senses that we gain from losing a sight. So that was a prime example there. I recognized the squeak in Michael's chair. Normally I would just visually see him and say, that is Michael Stump. I know this guy. And I would start the conversation from there. I don't have there's the movie The Scent of a Woman, where the main character recognizes the scent or the perfume of whoever might be in the room. But so I can't recognize any scent from Micheal,
Okay,
honestly.
I'm back. I have mine. I just have it up because I have to locate myself, kind of where I'm at. So
Yeah.
I'm going to pull it down, and then you'll know that we're both on the same century level. There you go.
I trust you.
I trust you too.
That's one thing I'm sure people with this blindness, with this disability, if we can call it that. I was just noting the difference between ability and disability, but
Yeah.
a blind individual, I assume, would need to develop a sense of trust. And
Sure, that's right.
there's a novel, I think it's just called Blindness by Jose Saramago. I think he's a Portuguese writer.
Okay.
I read, I think, the first half, but in the beginning, basically a character is at a traffic light and he loses sight. I guess he has like a white blindness, so it's not dark. It's like a white blindness, and he's helped out by a good Samaritan, but he doesn't let him into his apartment to wait for his wife to arrive. But later on, we find out that this good Samaritan actually steals the man's car, and it's a interesting novel. I recommend it to anyone. But
So, can I ask you some interesting questions around this notion of trust?
sure.
You indicated a notion of trust that's trusting others outside ourselves. What about, in my experience, because I've had certain disabilities for short periods of time, of trust, the trust we have to have in ourselves to even possibly exercise to trust others. Does that make sense?
Right. And I would
Especially
relate.
when you've lost an ability, it shakes your whole sensory system of where do I locate trust now?
Right. And so if it is, I'd say if you're born with disabilities such as blindness or deafness, it would just be a part of you, and that's who you are.
And
But
I
if
agree.
but I'm imagining what you're talking about would be something that happens in the midst of life, almost, and it would be a traumatic experience,
Right.
to a varying degree. So I'm relating it to trauma right now.
Okay. Okay. That's okay. I, and and because the trust, I just keyed into the trust issue for me through my trauma, and you make a good point, has been actually working with the trauma of learning how to reconnect to trusting my own bodily senses because they're so disruptive, and then I tend, you tend to gravitate to hopefully having people outside of yourself to trust you and re-regulate, just like when you were a baby, if that makes sense.
Right. And one quick logistical question: did you notice if it was recording at the beginning? I
No,
meant
I
to ask you
didn't.
that.
I didn't notice that, so I don't know if you want to check it out or not.
So I'm refraining from that. That's part of the disability I'm holding on to right now.
So I'm going to go ahead and check that out for you. Okay.
I appreciate that.
Thank you for asking and trusting me. Well, the red light up on the upper left, it's red and says recording. Does that mean it's recording?
That's as a visually, either visual or non-visual, that's the best we can do. So
Okay.
if it says it's recording, then it is.
Yeah, yeah, it's up in the left corner recording. And so
And
that's
one
all I know.
other quick note,
Mhm.
I did jump on a little early, so I would, and I know Ed and Marco both said they could not make it, and Johnny said he'd be here for up to an hour if he's able to.
Yeah.
So,
and we're at the 11 o'clock mark, so he should be jumping on because took note that he was going to attend for the first hour, but because of other things, he wasn't going to participate in the mystery hour, I guess.
So I want this to go on for about an hour, although my sense of time will obviously be limited. I don't have any alarms, nor do I wish to keep them, but I do have other commitments after an hour and a half after your 11 o'clock.
Okay, so you only want to go to 12:30 is what I hear you saying.
Correct.
Okay.
Between 12 and 12:30.
Yeah, and I think this is a great experiential experience. In fact, this is a typical experience at some level that martial artists do. When they attain a certain degree, they actually work their practice from blindfolded position.
Right. And I guess right before, or right as you were jumping on, I was noting the difference between considering this a disability or a loss of awareness of sight. And it's been noted in medical studies, and I was stating that it is intuitively understood by perhaps people like us that if you lose a sense, you're going to increase your hearing. Perhaps your sense of smell will increase as well. So your other senses compensate for the loss of sight.
Exactly.
You can be acclimated to the surrounding.
And that's the word that you use is there is a acclimation period to it. You know, that it's tough for people that, like you were pointing out, that have sight and then lost it. You know, you have to acclimatize to the new way of using your senses to get through the world.
Right. And just to give you a little background, I did start out with explaining the email thread that Ed started. That was obviously the inspiration for this. So I wanted to perhaps keep two things in mind as we go forth.
Okay.
And one is this cafe in general, like what, as we're blindfolded and participating, what perhaps would a visually impaired person be missing? So obviously, Ed brought up the lack of description of the books, or the clean language experiment wasn't conducive, didn't take into account the drawing that we produced, showing it on the screen rather than describing what is being seen.
Yes, right.
So I'd like for us to maybe pick up on some of those things as we go along, along with what we were just talking about, with what increased sensitivity do we have with, like, all I can hear right now is your voice. I cannot smell you or touch you or see you. So in an online interaction, I guess it's almost like a phone call in a way, but I feel like it's still a little bit more than a phone call. You don't necessarily, our hands are free. Right now my hands are moving as if I'm talking to you and you would see my hands, but I know you can't see them.
I have the blindfold back on. Yeah.
So in a group conference call like this, I feel like there's more freedom to.
That must be Johnny.
Participate. Hello, John.
Hello.
I don't know if it's him. Say welcome. We decided to start the experiment early.
Oh, I'm not going to do this. This scares me.
That's perfectly fine.
I don't get blindfolded for anybody.
Well, that's fine, John.
Especially on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you want to participate and be the seeing eyes with two blind people?
No. I think I have a lot of things to do today, and I just came on for the first hour to have like an open frame. But
okay.
I just have to go. I got a lot of stuff on my mind, And
Okay.
I don't want to interfere with everyone's fun. So have a great time.
Thank you, John.
Do you
Later.
mind sticking
Later.
around for a minute?
1 minute. Okay, sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to explain why I'm doing this. And it's mainly for two reasons. What to attune to what might be missed logistically, as we described in the email exchange that Ed started. And if you do have a few minutes, I wouldn't mind for you to stick around just for the conversational check-in part of it. But the other kind of question I'm wanting to keep in mind is how the lack of sight and this technology allows, well, since it'll be Micheal and I participating, and you might leave right after I'm done with these questions, but how that sense or lack of sense allows for the other senses to come into play. So perhaps our listening is increased, perhaps our sense of hearing is increased, and maybe since we can't smell each other, other senses are offline as well. What does that mean for an online exchange?
I think those are great, and this might be a perfect method for it. But I'm right now in a war zone. Okay, there's construction over there. There's construction over there, and I'm feeling the vibrations of the sound, which is noise, and what it means, which is they're tearing the neighborhood apart, and they're putting it together in their own image. Okay, and it's not going to be something that I'm sure I'm going to enjoy when it's finished. So these are the kind of things that are in my space right now. And I don't necessarily want to share all that with you guys. I'd actually prefer to protect the group from the dissonance and the noise in my environment. So blindfolding myself while I'm unable to hear you guys very well because of the noise in my actual environment would be more than a challenge for me, especially as I have pressing concerns I have to take care of. So I wouldn't be able to allow for a free flow of thought and feeling right now. And that's why I don't think I'd be a very good participant in this experiment that you've devised. It sounds like a lot of fun, but it's just not going to work for me today. Okay?
And that's, I'm glad that you gave voice to that, John, so that we understand. That's good.
Yeah, it's just the energy in my apartment is just chaotic, and I have to get out of here. And I would love to hang out with you guys if we had a clear purpose that we all shared, but this is not the thing I can do right now.
That's fine.
God bless
as far as I'm concerned, that's fine.
Blessings. Have a great time, and I'll watch it on the video when it comes out.
Excellent, and looking forward to your comments.
Yes, I'm sure going to learn a lot. Thanks.
Okay, Doug.
All right, we're back.
Yeah, and I just want to add, since as part of the component, that was excellently received from both of us, and even Johnny being clear what he needs to participate. I just want to put that out there, okay?
Right. And I'm the same way when I close, just like sleep, and when I do my version of meditation, which is kind of like a dream yoga technique, which involves darkness rather than sitting in a chair or sitting upright. So my meditation is lying down in a dark room. So I do recognize the need for lack of distraction.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to from I mean, we've kind of touched on this, is everybody has a different relationship to their sensorium, their senses, and how things work for them, you know. And I just resonate with Johnny because I understand when you've been through traumatized in different ways, you have to, part of healing that is to be willing to put limits on how much you can take.
Right.
And in fact, his demonstration, and I'm just thinking of this out loud right now, is a different form of what we're doing. We're using being on the internet, or blinded in that, and he is just putting up a boundary of a boundary that he needs of not participating because of how he very well described what's going on in his environment that might distract or activate him too.
Right. And in defense of Johnny and
Yeah.
How he perceives, based on his comments, how
Yeah.
he perceives these calls is a performance in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And
Right.
as we just noted, or I noted, this could essentially just be a phone call.
Right.
So there's a difference between a phone call being blindfolded on a Zoom line. It's maybe a phone call with some benefits, hands-free, which you can also do on the phone if you really wanted to. But yeah, I think what he and a lot of the group might be looking for is more of that performative aspect.
Yeah. I just want to touch in and I'll stop here and let you continue because you're leading this, but I just want to be a little persnickety to understand that from my view, we are being touched across this medium. Russians feel every culture gravitates to a certain sense, and Europeans or Americans are highly on a hierarchical level. Sight is the number one sense, but Russian research and the way Russian metaphors work is everything comes through touch, in the sense that our eyes are touched by the rays of the sun, our ears are touched by the sound waves, our skin is touched by the air. So they put a lot of maybe their hierarchical is to view that touch is a very hierarchically is the first sense that we need to pay attention to, and I tend to side with that in the sense that I've been touched through this medium, even though no smell, I'm not in the same space as you guys, and but through the sight and hearing, touch is working to help me across this medium to actually feel engaged in some way. And I've said this before, in a more intimate and intense way than when I'm actually out on the street working with people, because there's a different degree of interaction I have to take in consideration, if that makes sense.
Yes. And I appreciate your reflections. I didn't have too much of a frame.
Okay.
I'm coming up with a little bit of a frame here.
Good.
And so I noted that Ed had the email thread, but another thing Ed brought up, which he's exploring, and he brought up in the call on intersteeping interstices.
Yeah, right.
The Nora Bateson symathecy,
Mm-hmm.
or I guess it was multimedia. We watched one of her videos and a few other things, but he brought up this concept of that our hearing is always online, even as we're asleep. And that was another kind of inspiration for this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sometimes people with sight, to better hear something being read, or if a poetry is being read, or if a story is being read, or
Mm-hmm.
even a quote, or even if somebody's telling a personal story,
Right.
we often close our eyes to imagine ourselves in that realm.
Right.
So we take that sight sense offline in order to better hear.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, that's one of the heightened sensorial experiences that perhaps we're picking up on now is, I feel like I haven't been distracted by anything besides a couple tangential thoughts that are going on in my head. I'm not distracted by something moving in my background or
Yeah, right.
the computer screen. Sometimes I'll be reviewing my notes, or I'll search online for something somebody said.
Yeah.
So I'm not doing that at this time. So I feel, even if my hearing isn't necessarily like increasing, I'm not getting better at hearing and picking up and attuning to all the noises. There is a quality that is available.
Yes.
Simply because the other one is not. So, but no, I think an open frame would be nice.
Sure.
Perhaps sharing personal experiences of blindness that you've experienced, whether it's a friend or maybe an experiment you did when you were a kid and walked around blindfolded all day, whatever it might have been, and we'll take it from there.
Well, taking it from there, I have had some blind friends, but because of my life experience, and especially being I'll just say a kinesthetic, kinetic type of person, and involved in sports and physical activity as I am, I practice an interesting thing even in my own room, is that I purposely leave the lights dark and try to walk to the bathroom without needing any light, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that there's not light, but there's less light. And the purpose I do that for is not needing a lot of light. I'm trying to work with my eyes, being trusting that my eyes can see light in different degrees of darkness. In fact, one of the things I've researched is that given an opportunity of relaxing and adjusting to darkness, the human eye can see 1 photon of light. That's amazing to me. It's just a matter of adjusting to it. So I'm just going to throw that out there and see what you think.
So I don't know exactly what that means, 1 photon. I can imagine, but now that I have no sight, I'm, even with this blindfold on and the light on in the background, I'm probably picking up on hundreds, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of photons of light, even as my eyes are closed.
Well, how about thinking of it this way? I know I brought it down to a photon, is that as we challenge the notion of how our eyes can see with less light and even what appears to darkness in a normal situation.
Right.
Like being able to get out of bed, not having to turn on the light. And I usually, I pause and check in with my eyes as sensory. And I notice by not flipping on the light, there's a less degree of light per se, really less, that it helps me practice not depending on a lot of light to move around. Is that better, what I'm trying to say?
Right. And I'm not going to speak for everyone in the world, but I have the same practice as well.
Yeah, that dark. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Or no, even just not so much now that I have family, but at night, or going to the bathroom, or waking up in the morning, or in the middle of the night, whatever it might be, or in general, I just leave the lights off to save energy.
Yeah.
And just having, there's a certain amount of memory involved, of course, but it is good practice, and there's this attunement to where things are.
Yeah, that's a good word, attunement. Yeah, that's a good
There's
word.
a sense. Is it proprioception? I can't remember if that's
Yes,
what it's called.
it is a proprioception.
Like
yes.
The sense of being stared at. I think Rupert Sheldrake does the morphic resonance, or
Right.
I think he has another book called the sense of being stared at.
Ah.
And which I haven't read, but
Mm-hmm.
that speaks of other senses that are online
Mm-hmm.
within the body, or perhaps without.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I think it's more than just the five senses, because the appropriate sense, the appropriate perception is a different sense. It's tied to hearing. There's an intro perception of being able to locate our organs and where our feet are inside. So there's inner and outer. And those are senses tied to the five senses, but we don't, the five are kind of maybe baseline, but then there's branches that sometimes we take for granted of the expansion of those five senses, if I can say it that way.
mm-hmm. Yeah. And I noted recently reading Michael Murphy's Future of the Body. I had browsed through the book before, but there's, throughout the book, he provides examples of these extra sensory perceptions, ranging from what we're talking about now to what's most talked about in sports or athletes, of this sense
right.
of flow,
Mm-hmm.
kind of in the moment, in the zone, time. So the perception of time slows down.
Right.
Other perceptions become not necessarily under our control, but we're able to move in and out of certain movement. And in relation to blindness, yeah, I sense that's one reason I practice these dark meditation techniques, is because, well, yeah, that's a sense that's always, at least during the daytime, is always online for me. And to get rid of light, get rid of the sight perception, is to tune in to what's going on with my mental activity. I think Johnny is one that points out this, the ringing in his ear whenever he enters kind of that zone, before he enters into lucid dreaming and things like that.
I hadn't taken note of him saying that. Okay.
Yeah, I guess I've picked up on it simply because I've experienced it too. And he questions maybe it's tinnitus, I think is what it's called, the ringing in that we experience in our ears. Some people, that's always in the background. But so it's just a signal that you're a little bit more focused to what's going on in the body or around the body.
Right.
And
right.
Yeah, it's very useful.
Yeah, the blind people I've been around too, they've actually, it's interesting being blind. They've kind of just helped me. I mean, they're the first ones that verified the possibilities of a lack of their sight, because I've been, they just exemplified having a heightened, their other senses being heightened of hearing and stuff, and go, how did you do that? Because me being sight, maybe, depended on my sight to know things, and they have it, and yet, I think it ties into their listening and sense of balance, that somehow, even with the loss of sight, hearing helps. There are heightened attunement of objects around them and what's moving, not just hearing, but it heightens their sense of spatial arrangements. Not that it just heightens it different than in a different way that people with sight would take for granted.
Okay.
Right.
Like going back to your squeaky chair, when you're talking about it now, I recognize the squeaky chair again, but I've been tuning it out since because I don't need to locate where you are. I know you're present in some form here. But that helped acclimate at the beginning. Like, oh yeah, that's Michael. And
and I do have a squeaky chair. I have to say, I do have a squeaky chair, and
well, it doesn't interfere with the conversation.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep it that way because that's my signature, squeaky chair.
Okay.
A side note, and this is really a subset. It's not real. I just want to point out, because this is this is tied to my understanding of working with our own natural defense system, Doug, because our defense system is dependent on these senses. You know, how to defend ourselves from whether it's, you know, it's even tripping over a log, or, you know, any number of, from the, you know, just think of this spectrum of how our defense system is tied to our senses to help us, you know, not walk into a door or whatever like that. But in terms of loss of blindness, and I'm just bringing this down to a concrete level, just not, I don't want to go into detail, but I have certain female friends, in fact, my cousin, they don't like guns. I hear them, but I am fanatical. Well, what have you done to prepare yourself to defend yourself in case somebody breaks into your house? Because if you don't like a gun, I get it. You don't use a gun, but you need to be prepared if something like that happens, because you can't depend on the police to get there soon enough. So the first thing I tell them that they need to understand is don't turn on the lights to let them know where you're at. You know, it's real important that, you know, you learn how to defend yourself if you don't want to get in a fight, or you don't, you know, you're not but you can defend yourself by having strategies of, you know, definitely avoiding it, but you have to work at it. Like, don't turn on the lights, find have a baseball bat by, or find a place to hide, or know a place to hide in case they come in, you know. And all this kind of work is also to own how you, part of your defense system is going to get activated, and you have to learn how to listen to it and not let it overwhelm you, so that you can work with the situation. I just wanted to add that as far as how working with our senses and our defense system is really important from my point of view.
Right, and we're sticking with the blindness.
Yeah.
There is, along with the lack of sight, there's a heightened vulnerability to how the world is arranged around you.
Yeah.
Like that, you either need a trusted partner or a seeing eye dog, which I learned recently that seeing eye dog doesn't necessarily guide you everywhere, but they prevent you from running into certain things. They don't necessarily guide you at the right time to go. It doesn't know green from red or anything like that when you're crossing the street.
No.
So you still have to be attuned to what's going on. But
can you hear the leaf blower coming through my window? Can you hear that?
I cannot, but the air conditioning unit just came on almost
okay.
the same time that you asked that question. So
yeah, I was just wondering, because
that's what I'm hearing right now.
Yeah, because I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's what I'm hearing along with our talk. In my physical environment, there's somebody with a blower, you know, doing lawn, and I just wondered if it was passing through to you. That's all.
Say perhaps I'll have to listen in a little bit harder.
Oh, yeah. So offer up some things about how this experiment, how is this mysterious cafe, how can this help us be at our best, to quote Johnny?
And I think if others are willing at another time, which it doesn't need to happen, or people can respond just by watching this video, but it's two of us having a conversation, which makes it much, much easier than having, even if we're sighted, it gets a little more challenging once there's 4, 5, 6 people.
Exactly. Yeah, I would agree.
If we were all blindfolded or blind, we would need to really be in tune to stepping over each other's words.
Right. Right.
This is where we're lacking the nonverbal cues. We might have to develop a nonverbal cue, like I'm done, who's next, or maybe we'll go around in alphabetical order or something like that. Or somebody would vocally say, like after I'm done, they would say, okay, my hand's raised, or something like that. So there would have to be different dynamics in place to determine that. But
yeah, and I agree. That's kind of paralleling you. That's one thing that that's why sometimes when I catch myself just not meaning to, because there is such a thing that there's crosstalk that happens that nobody, it just happens, crosstalk. It's not necessarily intentional. And if you study it culturally, in different cultures, they don't have a problem of crosstalk like we Americans do. But I take note and I try to apologize that it was, most of the time, it's just bad timing. You pay attention as much as you can, but then there's just bad timing. And I personally, just my personal approach is I try to minimize taking any kind of crosstalk too personally, because I know sometimes it's just a matter of, oh, well, it just happened. It just happened.
So that's one aspect I'm picking up on. Since being blindfolded, there's, other than the lack of distractions, I feel like everything is the same. I don't get to see you smile or watch you as you're talking, which adds another dimension to it.
Yeah, that's true. You too. Yeah, me with you too.
but we can hear each other, and so go ahead, Michael.
No, I'm doing the very same thing. But I mean, I'd like to hear from you. What are the positive things that are coming through? I mean, you say it's other than those things not being there, certain things not being there, it's the same. And I don't doubt that, but I just want to hear from you, and then I'll say some of the positive things that I'm picking up with this experiment.
So I guess a little background on me personally, and I know Marco noted this in the email thread, and Ariadne both mentioned that they prefer the audio over the visual. At least because it's hands-free, they can do it while moving around, or there's more focus when you're just listening in.
Okay.
Perhaps, and I feel the same way.
Okay.
And I think this talk has been an example of that. I make it one of my main goals in life to not be distracted on the most minimal level, to perhaps the spiritual level of remaining focused on the main goal of my life, which is to be attuned to whatever you want to call it, the spirit or something like that.
Yeah, right.
So in our talk right now, I feel like I'm less distracted, which in turn allows me to be more focused. Even my thoughts, I noted there were a couple tangents that it went on, but that was mainly me with my anxiety that I have, thinking, oh, well, I need to have some direction in this conversation or something like that. I didn't frame it beforehand, so what am I going to say? So those were a couple tangential thoughts, but other than that, I've been really in line with our conversation here, more so than I would be if I was visually present. So that, I think that's my main takeaway at this time.
Yeah, go ahead.
My voice as well, or our voices, seem to have more quality to it. It's hard to describe, but I'm more focused on how you are saying things, and how I say things. I feel like I'm talking more than usual.
You are, and I like that. I like that.
I think that comes with when I'm taking in visual cues, I tend to sense, maybe incorrectly, that others want to talk or others have something to say. So when I'm in this non-visual headspace, I can perhaps pick up on the conversation better. Yeah. So that,
yeah, and
allow you to speak your mind.
Yeah, and I like a lot of things that you pointed out, and I agree. One of the things that I actually, it, I'm going to say this because it refers to a podcast I listened to by a female psychologist that's written a book called The Wisdom of Anxiety, and she calls anxiety she calls it your anxiety is your exquisite sensitivity. And what she's trying to point to, and it goes to this, because there is with this loss of sight, your anxiety and me, I've sensed a quality of a rising of anxiety, but because of reading her, I'm interpreting the anxiety as a signal to say, okay, now your sensitivity has to go in it has to go in a different direction. It has to be calibrated. And it's a new way of framing just the word anxiety and how sometimes it's always framed in a pathological sense. But she says that it's the flare. It's our sensitivity sending up a flare that, okay, attention, adjust your attention. Where's something's up. And the more you work with this and not let the interpretation of anxiety that's given us from society with the message that if you experience anxiety, you're supposed to feel shame. You're supposed to blame yourself for, just feeling that feeling of anxiety. There's a shame that is around it that our society does to a lot of our emotional intelligence, plain and simple. But I like the way she explained it as anxiety is our exquisite sensitivity, because I'm repeating myself, when I put this on, there was a certain, there was an uprising of anxiety, because now I've 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 lost I've lost a sensory input that I depend on, and therefore logically, from my point of view, there's going to be a natural rise in anxiety of the loss of that. Now, how well do we work with it? You and I feel the positive is how well we've been, we've been pretty agile and flexible. And I think a positive thing is how honest we've been in sharing as Johnny would say, the affective zone that we're operating in. Anxiety is the emotional description of what's happening to us, but seeing it as effective and seeing and framing it as working with our sensitivity and giving it some robustness and heighten it, and just not demonizing the anxiety as a signal to say, oh yeah, you gotta calibrate your sensitivity here. What's going on? Does that track well with you, what I'm saying?
It does, and I'd have to give it more thought to, I think, flesh it out a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
But could you say the author's name one more time?
Cheryl Paul. You can actually go to Sounds True, and Tammy Simon did a podcast with her, and that will help, because she traces this back to childhood, in the sense that up until the age of 10 years old, human beings, young children's nervous system is depending on adults, hopefully adults that are aware of this, and she feels that's coming online in terms of parental, upgrading parental, being better parents, of helping a child from a baby to, they get naturally overwhelmed in their nervous system, and what any caretaker adult is help them learn how to regulate it instead of shut it down, but actually, you could call it emotionally coach them how to deal with that. And that's a big generalization, because that's a skill set that depending on the child. But I like her framing of really not parents having an understanding that your child up until the age of 10 have a hard time regulating their inner experience, and especially when it's overwhelmed and intense. And it's not necessarily because of bad things, it's because they don't know what to do with it.
Right. And I think an aspect of what Cheryl is doing, and that is also another aspect of what I'm picking up on in this conversation, is the notion of time, or giving time to these anxieties, if we want to call it that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'll start with my own my experience of raising a child. He's 5 now. Miles is extremely sensitive to the, not even tone and voice, but they're just like we pick up on certain things, the nonverbal cues. His nonverbal cue meter, and perhaps many kids' nonverbal cue meter, is extremely high.
Ah, okay, okay.
And there's not much yelling going on in the house. There's not much aggressive discipline, but he is highly in tune to even the most minor, the most minimal change in a tone and voice, to the point where he would react with crying if we asked him to, I don't know, pick up his clothes or something like that, or if he could sense that we were a little tired at the end of the day and wanted to speed things up a little bit or something like that. But as we've worked with him, as you're saying, the parental guidance and the trust developed between the caregiver, he's able to not react so strongly, though that anxiety, as she's phrasing it, I imagine is there at all times.
Yeah, it's part of the nervous system. She said, like it says, it's part of the nervous system. It's a defense system within the nervous system to help it manage being overwhelmed in a child. That anxiety, and that's why she calls anxiety a sensitivity. But as you get into adulthood, what we do is we numb that sensitive. We label the heightened sensitivity as anxiety, and then what we're doing is we're not training ourselves or working with of the gift of sensitivity. I mean, how many people are called? I'm sure you described your child as a child that happens to be extremely sensitive, and I don't say that in a bad way or anything. It's just a fact. It's just, that's what it is. But I know from my experience, I was labeled a lot of time, Mike, you're being too sensitive, you're too emotional. Well, now I've come to find out is I had parents that didn't understand how to help me with that. And in fact, even my own parents are sensitive, and they just don't take ownership of it.
And it's described, I guess there's the flip you can do from seeing it as a disabling or a disability, this anxiety, into almost a superpower, if you want to call it that, or a heightened ability, or almost a checkpoint where you can tune into that frequency of the heightened sense, as you were saying, to receive kind of, well, there's a change in the environment, and this might be a flag that I need to respond a certain way, rather than it's a heightened sense and I need to shut down or something like that.
Yeah, and I think, Doug, it challenges us knee-jerk putting any ability into a binary good-bad place. It may be good and bad. There may be good and bad in how we relate to the ability, but the ability, to me, I think what helps and takes it out of, default binary way of looking at anxiety or anger or anything that we perceive as negative, instead of, well, this is what's coming up, and just looking at how we're it's not the energy of anger that's bad. It's the way we've come to, causes and conditions come to relate to it. You know, fire is good, but, you know, if you get burned and stuff, you're going to be afraid of it. But, you know, eventually you got to learn that, you know, it's not the fire that's the problem. It's the fact that you got burned, and now you got to learn how to use fire in a good way.
Right.
Yeah, you know, I think what I hear, I love this, because what I hear between us is you and I are negotiating this default binary way of looking at what these kind of things. Is that fair to say?
Right. And that's almost how this was. I don't know if that's how this cafe was framed to a certain extent, but there was the viewing this specific issue, blindness, or accessibility because of, or because of blindness. So I was focused on like the physical element of that, and or the more disabling side of this blindness.
Right.
Like participation online, accessibility of the cafe, watching what we say based on concern for the disabled, versus using this as a tool for going into the other realm. But yeah, there's no binary here. That if I was a blind, like right now, it's easy being a blind person. So I'm thinking, well, yeah, my senses are heightened and this is great, and we've noted some of the minor drawbacks, but if I had to turn this off and then continue on with my day, I would be having a horrible day. I could barely get to the bathroom in my office. My phone might be about to die. I wouldn't be able to charge it because I don't know where my charger is. I wouldn't be able to call somebody to drive me home. I'd have to go out in the street and kind of yell at people and say, hey, what's going on here? Help me.
Yeah, and you notice that all those things you describe, they land on me as, okay, yeah, my anxiety just went through the roof of having to, because the anxiety is saying there's something I got to take care of and I don't know how to do it.
Right.
And all I'm trying to, and I know you know this, but I'm just saying this because of people listening to it, all I'm trying to say is, instead of numbing the anxiety, and this is a main thread for her and it works for me, instead of numbing when we experience anxiety, how about taking a curiosity? And first we have to challenge the shame for even experiencing anxiety that society tends to put out, but a curiosity of, like we were saying, everything you said before, it's true, you're heightened anxiety, but we also, earlier in the conversation, that there was low-level ways to maybe help us calibrate and readjust. If we had to do this all day long, we'd have to go through a training, you know? And I think from my point of view, Doug, because of how I've been injured and had to come back and stuff, I'm just going to be persnickety, is, to me, it's not, I've never felt I've been disabled, but I have been limited, and I had to find a way to acknowledge and work with the limitations and not feel that just because I'm limited, I'm disabled, if that makes sense.
Right.
And that goes to, I think Jeffrey talks a lot about that, because, you know, I know Jeffrey has an angle on how we treat disability people, how we think of disabilities. You know, Jeffrey, I've heard him talk about that. He's made comments about that.
Right. And I know, yeah, he's experienced this within academic studies as well as working directly with those that are disabled.
Yeah.
We also shared a reading group with the minor gesture, Aaron Manning's book.
Yeah, that was a beautiful series that you guys did. That was one of the first ones I actually I was lingering on the sidelines watching.
Right. And I've forgotten most of the kind of exact terminology that was used. And if I was to summarize my image of how it relates to this conversation, is that the word disability perhaps needs to be completely rethought as to how we interact with the world, and
Right.
our sense of sight, our full cognitive ability, at least the standard model of cognitive ability, to navigate throughout the world that's been arranged in front of us.
Right.
It's easy to take for granted, but it's also a disabling feature in our life that does not allow us to tune in to, say, an autistic person who's going to hear the air conditioning unit and the weed eater outside or the blower, and it's all a stew of sounds coming together that creates a completely different world for this individual. So that kind of ties in with a couple of things I'd like to get into as we kind of wind down our conversation, is this
Go
idea
for
of
it, Doug.
consciousness.
I'll follow your lead. Go for it.
The idea of consciousness,
Oh God. Go ahead.
which is essentially what I was just talking about there, is and I think it'll come up in our Bateson call too, based on what the reading is.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot tell you what the reading is right now, but there's this term that Bateson's using that he extracts from Carl Jung, about the pleroma and the creatura. I guess these.
I'm gonna. Is that in the next section we read? Hopefully, or was that?
I believe. Yeah, it should be for this week's assignment.
Okay.
And Bateson equates the pleroma to the map and creatura as the territory.
Okay.
And that's one reason why the territory is not the map, or the map is not the territory. But there's a lot of dynamics there. But I guess what I want to hone in on is this idea that our perceptions that we're gifted with as human beings allows us to be in a certain state of consciousness, but we're also even perceiving. So right now we can't see, but if we were to see the computer in front of us, our reception of that perception is still only maybe a very, very small fraction of the infinite amount of possibilities that could come through.
True.
Whether it's color, the spectrum of light that comes through, whatever it might be. So we've in our creatura and in this territory, we have to filter out so much that we need to realize we're within this limited mind, or consciousness, I guess.
Right.
That's just one aspect of where we could go with that. And the other thing that I want to throw in is the aspect of time. That's another thing I'm picking up on here. Besides my concern that I have no idea what time it is, my perception of time is thrown off when I'm blindfolded.
It's altered.
So there were moments, especially in the middle of the conversation when I wasn't focused on time, that I sensed I was out of time, the typical time. And the words we were saying, even right now when I'm focusing on this aspect of time that's outside of the clock time, I tend to enter another zone of a different wavelength in which I can, not romantically, but I can hang on to every one of your words. I can hang on to your words in the sense that they're being heard in a different place.
Well, if I could take the risk of adding a word that doesn't necessarily have to indicate any kind of romance or sexuality, but it's eros. It's that part of consciousness or creation that actually is exploding with manifestation and form. There's because eros is filled with sensory, the senses and what the senses are picking up. You know, it's a form of consciousness that I think sometimes we need to kind of honor in a way other than overly sexualizing, you know, and especially in terms of the lower half of the body, instead of it being a full sensory online expression of consciousness, if that makes sense.
Makes sense to me.
Because by owning that doesn't dismiss, you know, the aspect of having sex or being engaged on a sexual level. It's just that we don't contract it down just to the lower half of our bodies, and that's the only place that we're supposed to interpret eros or any sense of attraction, because I think there's an eros is based on attraction that in this conversation we have an attraction to the ideas, and we're expressing ourselves, and it has a certain, for me, because I don't want to speak for you, a certain central sensory, it lands on me that way, and it's important for me to accept that and receive that, because it helps me better find mutual understanding with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll just speak briefly to at least my experience with this eros is that it's always been offline or internalized and bastardized in a lot of ways based on
Oh, that's so true.
The way things are arranged, and it is such a challenge to interact, not just with the opposite sex or your preferred gender, or even with of the like-minded, men we've noted for just have trouble interacting because of the manliness that's supposed to be expressed.
Very true. Very true.
So yeah, and those terms, arousal was another one that
yes,
I'm aroused in this conversation.
Yeah.
Just because of these heightened awarenesses, there's this certain arousal that comes from the body. It's not the nether regions. It's surrounding me right now. So it's.
So can I ask you, have you ever experienced that kind of eros being out in nature? The eroticism of nature itself?
Can't think of any one example, but yeah, that.
I just was trying to indicate if you've had glimpses of that type of, I call them glimpses of that type of experience, because I've had those experiences both without drugs and then also with certain hallucinogenics, because I feel hallucinogenics are a plant-based, from the earth, way of the earth opening our senses up to the full, opening our sensitivity and our limited way that we view our finite being. It kind of opens the portals for that, so that I'm going to touch this back into the notion of consciousness, and we do have a finite conscious, I agree with that, but I think sometimes we don't acknowledge there's actually an infinity that is existing within our own finiteness. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I don't want to bring up the Bateson call again, but I think this came up in the Bateson call. I wish I could recite the William Blake poem that Jeffrey quoted
Oh,
from
last week, the one he did last week.
Right, but essentially, we take the infinite, and we became the serpent. Is how it starts out, but yeah, we have this finite mind that wants to experience the infinite, but we're incapable of it, or it's overwhelming, or we've again bastardized the world around us. And yeah, something like the psychedelic experience, or sensory deprivation is one that we're experiencing right now. There is this heightened sense of awareness of the infinite, and yeah, that is taking me into different experiences of time, slowing it down.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
So yeah, I think this has been a worthwhile experiment. I hope we can not necessarily do it again in the cafe, but take this memory that we have here out into the rest of the world, as we tend to do.
Yeah. I very much appreciated. I was attracted to your. I'm always attracted to your titles. You know, I've even said that I'm kind of a title horror when it comes to books. I can get hooked on a book just based, like The Wisdom of Anxiety is a perfect example. It has flavors and reminds me of Alan Watts' The Wisdom of Insecurity. I think there's a lot of crossover what she's doing, but she's updating it with the neuroscience along with a very certain practices to help us, especially the practice of not numbing ourselves or taking in the social conditioning about our feelings or our emotional states. There's a big message to want to pathologize those states rather than get curious and learn how to work with them, especially as adults. But the adults, if they have done a good job, then we can grow children that know how to work with their nervous systems that get into those states of overwhelm or, intensity, or, she says, to help them go, it's okay, this will move through you, it will pass through you. It's not, it's to help them. It's to really concretely, even though we're not just our bodies, I agree with that, but we do have bodies, and our nervous systems have certain ways of reacting to things that we can actually influence by our spiritual practices, from my point of view.
I agree.
So your little guy, just do your best, Dad, to help him hone his sensitivity. But the one thing from my child rearing years is the dilemma with us as parents, and good parents as adults, not parents that are children or act like children. Part of our difficulty is, at the same time of working with their sensitivity, and I feel you probably know this, is we also have to set boundaries with them. They need to have structure of not demonizing their expressions, but we have to help them learn how best to express themselves when they're in a certain state. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's well said. And yeah, the boundary issue. Yeah, there's again infinite amount of social boundaries and boundaries within the framework of the day that we all have to learn, especially children. So I appreciate that feedback.
Yeah, and I think it's our job, as I've already took my parenting from Cabal LeBron, is I'm their guardian. I don't own them, and it's helped me put in check that tendency that some parents can get consumed with over control and owning their children, and not be good guardians to help them grow up to be human beings. That's been my operating, working with my children, even now as adults.
Well, I'm my blindfold is getting quite uncomfortable.
Can we
so
take it
I'm
off
wondering-
before we leave?
I was thinking that, and before we do that,
Oh.
maybe let's just have a pause for a minute.
Thank you.
And
I think that's
when
wise.
when you feel ready to take it off, you can. And if something arises before you want to take it off, then let it out.
Okay.
So we can start that now.
Hi there, Doug.
Oh,
Hi.
I was probably off camera for quite a while.
Yeah. Well, I think we did good because we went basically an hour and 6 minutes, but we did a lot in that time, don't you think?
It's a great conversation.
I really appreciate it. This is something that really resonates with me of what you brought forward. And that, so
Good to know.
yeah. So if we need to check in and do this again, maybe just the two of us without posting it, feel free to let me know, because I think it's an interesting exercise that needs to be done from time to time.
Thank you
I mean,
for
we couldn't. I
your
don't know how
insight
we
today.
would. Huh? What?
Well, I appreciate what you brought forth.
Well,
Yeah, this conversation will be lodged in my memory for a while, I think, just based on how we were communicating. So
yeah.
I did
think-
notice that other than me talking more, I did notice that your speech was more articulate. The inarticulate speech of the heart came through, I guess.
and I love you remembering that inarticulate speech of the spirit, and thank you for the feedback, because you're right. I'm just now being aware of how actually it probably slowed. There was a slowing down, a need to slow down without having our sight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for that feedback. I like the fact that we're doing more talking.
Yeah, and even if we're not blindfolded, I think that's something we can visually perhaps squander.
Yeah,
That's the wrong word.
true.
But if we are using the visual and we're in that mode, and
Yeah.
we don't necessarily need to reset, take 5 minutes to put on a blindfold and do that. We can keep this in memory. So yeah.
So just because we got a few minutes, so how would we do this? Would we have to plug our ears and just talk with?
If we had the lack of
hearing. Yeah.
And that's a whole different can of worms, right? I mean, there's sign language, which I used to know the alphabet.
Oh, okay.
That would be like trying to do Morse code over the internet.
Yeah, and especially facial cues besides hand cues.
Right, or doing the old-fashioned way, writing it down and putting it on the screen.
Yeah. I appreciate you remembering inarticulate speech of the heart, because that's kind of a big metaphor for me.
I'm a Van Morrison fan too. I don't listen to much music or buy CDs much nowadays, but when I did collect CDs, I had at least from the 90s on back, I had all of his records.
Cool.
I like the older stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm too young to appreciate the most recent stuff.
He's got some good new stuff. Born to Sing is a good CD if you ever get a chance to listen to it. Born to Sing. It's a really good CD. But do you still listen to music? I mean, is it part of your?
it comes and goes. I've recently
Oh, okay.
been listening to more music than usual.
Mhm.
But at home, the space to play loud music isn't
Yeah,
there.
right.
But I think I made a comment about the tortoise, which is
Hmm.
kind of like post rock jazz
Yeah, yeah.
music, and my son really likes that every night. So I'll be in the room after we read books and
Uh,
listen to that. So I've listened to that for almost 2 years,
mm,
maybe a year and a half now,
mm,
pretty much every night,
hmm.
which has been very interesting. Kind of growing with that CD or that album, and
Nice.
yeah, I don't listen to too much music anymore.
Now, didn't your little one just turn 1 year old?
Mm-hmm. The beginning of
Yeah.
May.
So what have you noticed about him?
Completely different personality. He's been raised, at least for the second half of his life, from 6 months on, with the in-laws living in the house.
So yeah, okay,
So there's a
different.
lot more social interaction.
Yeah.
He's my son loves, my older son has great articulate speech,
Mm,
but he's shy
mm,
when it comes to branching out with others.
mhm.
Uh, but my youngest can't quite speak just yet, but he's going to be a talker or a social butterfly. He's very interactive with his environment in that sense. So complete
Yeah.
opposite.
Yeah. Cool. Because there was a different ecology came online with the in-laws moving in with the second half of your youngest son. There was a different ecology set up.
Right.
Yeah.
And having an older brother is a big change. Before, it's my wife and I who tend to be very quiet. I
Ah.
mean, we talk quite a bit, but no TV in the house. No, there's not
Oh, okay.
noise constantly in the house. So it's a reading environment, perhaps.
Okay. Okay.
And so that's changed.
Yeah,
There's always something going on.
yeah, I just want to encourage about Sounds True has that podcast with that author on the wisdom of anxiety. Her actually today, the Kindle and the book comes out, but I found it really, I like Sounds True because she has some good podcasts and then you can
Mm-hmm.
copy the transcript and read it later.
Yeah, that's one I used to listen to, or I had in my collection of podcasts I'll be notified about. But since I got this phone, I haven't updated it yet. So
Okay.
I'll add that one. I've got the
Well,
weird studies and a few others.
Yeah. And if you do, I would like your feedback and exchange as two parents of what she's saying. Because I know that you and I and Marco, there is a common bound about part of our, I mean, I know I have children that are older, but at the same time, just because they're adults doesn't mean you don't have, you still, they have my genes. I got to know what they're doing.
Right. So yeah, well, say is it the latest?
Yeah, it's
Or would
supposed
I
to
have
be.
go through archives?
It was just plugged in this past week. Look,
Okay.
and
Yeah, I'll check it
Cheryl
out.
Paul, the wisdom of anxiety, and that. So anyway, thank you, my friend.
Thank you. It was
Have a good
a
day,
pleasure.
and I'll see you on Thursday morning.
Right. I'll be there too.
Okay, take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.